My parents crowned my sister as royalty while treating me like nothing. I finally walked away, and their meltdown was unbelievable. Growing up in suburban Ohio, I always thought every family had a golden child and a scapegoat. Turns out mine just took it to Olympic levels. My name is Natalie, and for 26 years, I watched my parents worship the ground my sister Madison walked on, while treating me like an unwelcome houseguest who overstayed her welcome by decades. Madison was born 2 years after me, and from the moment she drew her first breath, the world apparently revolved around her existence. My parents, Linda and Robert, decided she was their masterpiece, while I became the rough draft they wished they could crumple up and toss in the trash. The favoritism started early. While Madison got designer clothes and the latest toys, I received hand-me-downs from our neighbor's daughter, who was 2 sizes smaller than me. When Madison wanted piano lessons, my parents immediately enrolled her with the best instructor in town. When I asked for art classes, they claimed money was tight and suggested I practice drawing with the free coloring books from the dentist's office. Every birthday party, every Christmas morning, every family gathering became a celebration of Madison's superiority. She would unwrap gift after expensive gift, while I received practical items like socks and school supplies. My parents would beam with pride as she performed her latest piano piece for relatives, but when I showed anyone my artwork, they quickly changed the subject. School achievements meant nothing if they came from me. Madison brought home a B+ on her math test, and my parents took her out for ice cream to celebrate. I earned straight A's for an entire semester and received a distracted "good job," while my mother focused on helping Madison with her science project that was due the next day. The double standards were suffocating. Madison could stay out past curfew, skip chores, and talk back to our parents without consequence. Meanwhile, I got grounded for forgetting to take out the trash, or for speaking up when dinner conversations centered entirely around Madison's social life and accomplishments. By high school, the pattern was so established that even teachers and family friends noticed the disparity. Madison was only 2 years behind me, so we sometimes had the same teachers who would compare us directly. My Aunt Carol once pulled me aside during a family barbecue and asked if everything was okay at home. I wanted to scream about the injustice, but loyalty to family kept my mouth shut. Besides, who would believe that parents could be so blatantly unfair to their own child? College offered me a temporary escape, but even hundreds of miles away, the favoritism followed me through phone calls. Every conversation with my parents began and ended with updates about Madison's achievements, boyfriends, and social events. They'd grudgingly ask about my studies before launching into another 20-minute monologue about how proud they were of Madison's latest accomplishment. When I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in graphic design, my parents attended the ceremony, but spent the entire reception talking to other families about Madison's acceptance to law school. My moment of triumph became background noise to their anticipation of her future success. The real breaking point came last spring during Madison's law school graduation. My parents flew across the country, rented a luxury hotel suite, and threw a massive celebration party. They invited extended family, family friends, and even some of Madison's law school classmates. The party had professional catering, a hired photographer, and custom decorations, proclaiming, "Congratulations, Madison, an elegant script." 3 months later, I received my master's degree in marketing with a perfect 4.0 GPA while working full-time to pay for school. My parents' response: a text message that said, "Congrats, honey," followed immediately by a paragraph about Madison starting her second year of law school and her internship at a prestigious firm. The inequality reached absurd heights when Madison decided to buy her first house. My parents offered to cover her down payment, co-sign her loan, and even contributed money for furniture. When I mentioned looking for my own place, my father suggested I find a roommate to split costs because real estate is expensive these days. Meanwhile, Madison received a brand new BMW as a congratulations on the new job gift, while I was still driving a 15-year-old Honda Civic I'd bought myself in college. The car had over 200,000 MI and needed constant repairs, but asking my parents for help with a newer vehicle was apparently unreasonable. Family dinners became exercises in endurance. Every conversation revolved around Madison's career, her boyfriend Derek, their vacation plans, and her opinions on everything from politics to restaurant choices. I could sit silently for hours while my parents hung on her every word, treating her casual observations like profound wisdom. The final straw came during Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. Madison arrived 2 hours late without calling, causing my mother to keep the entire meal warm and everyone else to wait. When she finally showed up, my parents acted like she'd bestowed a tremendous gift upon us with her presence. During dinner, Madison announced that Derek had proposed during their weekend trip to Napa Valley. This was particularly significant since she just graduated from law school that spring and landed her first job at a corporate firm. My parents exploded with excitement, immediately planning an engagement party and discussing wedding venues. My mother started crying happy tears, while my father opened a bottle of champagne he'd been saving for a special occasion. In the midst of their celebration, I quietly mentioned that I'd received a promotion at my marketing firm and would be leading a major campaign for a Fortune 500 company. The room fell silent for approximately 3 seconds before my mother asked Madison about wedding dress shopping. Sitting at that dinner table, invisible despite being physically present, I finally understood that nothing I ever accomplished would matter to these people. I could cure cancer, win a Nobel Prize, or discover life on Mars, and they'd still find a way to make the conversation about Madison's latest manicure. The holiday weekend continued with wedding planning dominating every conversation. My parents spent hours on their phones researching venues, photographers, and caterers. They discussed budgets that exceeded my annual salary and debated guest lists that included people who probably didn't know I existed. When I tried to contribute to conversations about flowers or music, my suggestions were politely dismissed or ignored entirely. But when Madison expressed interest in a particular venue, my parents immediately called the schedule a tour. The message was crystal clear. My opinions were irrelevant, while her whims were commands. December brought Madison's elaborate engagement party hosted at an upscale country club with over 150 guests. My parents spared no expense on decorations, food, and entertainment. They hired a professional DJ, arranged for a photo booth, and even had custom cocktail napkins printed with Madison and Derek's names. During the party, my father gave a speech about his perfect daughter and how proud he was to watch her find such happiness. He talked about her achievements, her kindness, and her bright future. Meanwhile, I stood in the back of the room, wondering if he could even name my major in college without looking it up. The holidays solidified my decision. Watching my parents fawn over Madison while treating me like hired help during family gatherings made everything painfully obvious. I was the daughter they tolerated, while she was the daughter they treasured. January of last year marked the beginning of my strategic withdrawal from their lives. I started by reducing phone calls from weekly to monthly, then eventually stopped calling altogether. When they occasionally reached out, I kept conversations brief and surface level. I declined invitations to family dinners, citing work commitments and social plans. Initially, they barely noticed my absence because Madison commanded all their attention anyway. She was busy with wedding planning, which consumed every family interaction. By March of last year, I had effectively gone no contact with my parents. They didn't seem to register my absence until Madison's wedding invitations needed to be addressed. Suddenly, my mother realized she hadn't spoken to me in weeks. The phone calls started then. My mother left voicemails asking about my address for the invitation, wondering why I hadn't been returning calls, and expressing concern about my absence from recent family events. Her tone suggested mild annoyance, rather than genuine worry, like I was inconveniencing her by being unavailable. I didn't respond to the calls or texts. Instead, I focused on building a life that didn't revolve around seeking approval from people who would never give it. I started dating someone wonderful named Jake, made new friendships through work and hobbies, and began pursuing interests I'd neglected while trying to compete for my parents' attention. Spring brought the wedding planning into high gear, and my parents apparently needed me to participate in Madison's special day. My mother's messages became more frequent and slightly more desperate. She wanted me to be a bridesmaid, help with shower planning, and contribute to wedding expenses. The irony was staggering. After years of excluding me from important moments and conversations, they suddenly expected me to drop everything and celebrate Madison's happiness. They wanted me to pay for parties honoring the sister who had received every advantage while I got the scraps. I maintained my silence through the bridal shower, the bachelorette party, and all the pre-wedding events. According to my aunt, Carol, who kept me informed through occasional texts, my parents were starting to panic about my absence, but still couldn't understand why I was being difficult. The wedding invitation arrived in my mailbox in April of last year, addressed in my mother's careful handwriting. Inside was a formal invitation to Madison and Derrick's June wedding at an exclusive vineyard venue. A handwritten note from my mother asked me to call her immediately about being in the wedding party. I stared at that invitation for hours, remembering every slight, every dismissal, every moment I've been made to feel worthless in my own family. The audacity of expecting me to celebrate Madison's happiness after years of being treated like an afterthought was breathtaking. Instead of calling, I wrote a letter. I spent days crafting my response, ensuring every word conveyed exactly what I needed to say without room for misinterpretation. The letter detailed years of favoritism, the psychological impact of being the forgotten daughter, and my decision to build a life without them. I mailed the letter along with the returned wedding invitation, officially declining to attend. In the letter, I explained that I wouldn't be attending the wedding or any future family events. I outlined specific examples of their differential treatment from childhood birthday parties to recent holiday gatherings. The letter concluded with my decision to go permanently, no contact. I explained that their behavior had caused irreparable damage to our relationship and that I deserved better than being an afterthought in my own family. I wished Madison happiness, but stated that I would no longer participate in the charade of being a loving family. The response was swift and explosive. My phone rang constantly for 3 days straight. My mother left increasingly frantic voicemails ranging from confusion to anger to desperate pleading. She demanded explanations, accused me of being selfish and dramatic, and threatened to show up at my apartment if I didn't call back. My father, who rarely called me under normal circumstances, left several messages expressing his disappointment in my immature behavior. He claimed I was ruining Madison's special day and demanded that I reconsider my decision for the sake of family unity. The most revealing messages came from Madison herself. She called crying, not because she missed me or wanted to repair our relationship, but because my absence was causing drama during her wedding planning. She accused me of being jealous and trying to steal attention from her big day. Her voicemails perfectly encapsulated everything wrong with my family dynamic. Even my act of setting boundaries and protecting my mental health was somehow about her. She couldn't conceive of a world where my decisions weren't motivated by jealousy or attention-seeking. The calls escalated when I continued ignoring them. My mother recruited extended family members to contact me, painting me as the villain who was abandoning family during an important time. Cousins and aunts received carefully edited versions of the story that portrayed me as ungrateful and spiteful. The manipulation campaign my mother launched was sophisticated and calculated. She called my cousin Jennifer, claiming I'd had a mental breakdown and was refusing to communicate with family. She told my Uncle Mike that I was jealous of Madison's success and trying to ruin the wedding out of spite. Each relative received a slightly different version of events, but all painted me as unstable and vindictive. What my mother hadn't anticipated was that some family members had their own memories of our family dynamics. My cousin Jennifer later told me she'd always wondered why I seemed so quiet and withdrawn during family gatherings, while Madison commanded center stage. My Uncle Mike admitted he'd noticed the stark difference in how my parents spoke about their daughters during casual conversations. The smear campaign backfired when my grandmother, my father's mother, called my mother directly. Grandma Rose had apparently received multiple calls from relatives asking about my breakdown and decided to investigate for herself. She'd always been sharp as a tack despite her 87 years, and the inconsistencies in the stories people were telling her raised red flags. Grandma Rose had witnessed decades of family interactions and possessed the kind of observational skills that come with age and wisdom. She'd watched me grow up in Madison's shadow, seen the differential treatment at countless family gatherings, and noticed how I'd gradually become more distant from my parents over the years. When she called me directly, her voice was gentle but firm. She asked me to tell her what had really happened, and for the first time in months, I broke my silence. I spent 2 hours on the phone with her, explaining the years of favoritism, the emotional neglect, and the final incidents that had led to my decision to cut contact. My grandmother listened without interruption, occasionally making soft sounds of understanding or disapproval. When I finished my account, she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. Her words validated everything I'd experienced. She'd seen it all happening, but hadn't known how to intervene without causing family conflict. She told me about conversations she'd had with my grandfather before he passed away, where they discussed their concerns about how I was being treated. They'd worried about my self-esteem and wondered if they should say something to my parents, but ultimately decided it wasn't their place to interfere with their son's parenting choices. Grandma Rose's support was unexpected and incredibly healing. She apologized for not speaking up sooner and told me she was proud of me for setting boundaries and protecting myself. She promised to stop the gossip campaign by telling other family members the truth about what had been happening for years. True to her word, my grandmother became my unlikely advocate within the extended family. She called the relatives who had been contacted by my mother and provided them with a more accurate picture of our family dynamics. Her reputation for honesty and fairness gave her words significant weight in family circles. The revelation that multiple family members had noticed the favoritism but stayed silent was both validating and heartbreaking. It confirmed that my perceptions had been accurate while highlighting how many adults had failed to protect me from psychological harm during my formative years. My Aunt Carol was the only family member who reached out with genuine concern. She admitted that she'd witnessed the favoritism over the years and understood my decision. Her support validated feelings I'd questioned for decades, confirming that the differential treatment had been as obvious to others as it felt to me. Carol shared specific memories that I'd forgotten or dismissed. She remembered Madison's 8th birthday party where I helped set up decorations and serve food while Madison played with her friends. She recalled Christmas mornings where the gift disparity was so obvious that other adults had exchanged uncomfortable glances. These concrete examples helped me trust my own memories and experiences. The most powerful validation came when Carol told me about a conversation she'd had with my mother years earlier. She gently suggested that I might need more attention and support, pointing out that I seemed to be struggling with confidence issues. My mother had dismissed her concerns, claiming I was naturally independent and didn't need as much guidance as Madison. This revelation was particularly painful because it showed that my emotional needs had been recognized by others, but deliberately ignored by my parents. They'd chosen to interpret my self-sufficiency as proof that I didn't need their support rather than recognizing it as a survival mechanism I developed in response to their neglect. Carol also shared information about my parents' current state that helped me understand the desperation behind their contact attempts. According to her, my mother had been crying daily since receiving my letter, unable to understand why I was being so dramatic about perceived slights from the past. My father oscillated between anger and confusion, alternately blaming me for being oversensitive and wondering if they'd made mistakes. The most telling detail was that they'd started arguing with each other about responsibility for the situation. My mother blamed my father for being too focused on work to notice family dynamics, while he accused her of being too soft with Madison and too harsh with me. Their marriage was apparently experiencing strain as they grappled with the consequences of their parenting choices. Madison's reaction to their distress was characteristically self-centered. Instead of using the crisis as an opportunity for self-reflection about her role in the family dynamic, she'd become angry that her wedding planning was being disrupted by drama about me. She'd actually suggested they should just ignore my letter and pretend nothing had happened. Her inability to comprehend that her lifetime of preferential treatment had psychological consequences for me was stunning, but not surprising. She'd grown up believing she deserved special treatment and couldn't imagine that her advantages had come at my expense. The idea that she might bear some responsibility for family dysfunction was completely foreign to her. The wedding planning had become increasingly stressful for my parents as they try to manage their emotional turmoil while maintaining appearances of family happiness. Wedding vendors asking about family photos and seating arrangements forced them to confront the reality of my absence in practical ways that made the situation impossible to ignore. My mother had apparently become obsessed with finding ways to get me to attend the wedding, suggesting everything from surprise visits to hiring a family counselor to mediate our conflict. Her desperation revealed how little she understood about the depth of damage that had been done over decades of differential treatment. The extended family drama had also created unexpected consequences for Madison's wedding plans. Several relatives had started asking uncomfortable questions about family dynamics after learning about my absence. Some had even suggested postponing the wedding until family issues could be resolved, which sent Madison into a panic about her perfect timeline being disrupted. These developments confirmed that my decision to write the letter had been correct. The truth about our family dynamics was finally being exposed to people who had witnessed it for years, but never acknowledged it openly. The carefully maintained facade of family happiness was cracking under scrutiny from relatives who were finally asking direct questions. My parents' attempts to control the narrative were failing because too many people had their own memories of our family interactions. They couldn't rewrite history when multiple witnesses had seen the same patterns of favoritism and differential treatment playing out over decades of family gatherings and celebrations. The stress of managing both the wedding planning and the family crisis was apparently taking a toll on everyone involved. My mother had lost weight and wasn't sleeping well. According to Carol, my father was drinking more than usual and had become irritable with coworkers. Even Madison was showing signs of strain, despite trying to maintain her usual confident demeanor. The irony wasn't lost on me that my absence was causing more disruption to their lives than my presence ever had. For years, I'd been the stable, predictable daughter who caused no problems and required minimal attention. Now that I was gone, they were discovering how much emotional labor I've been quietly providing to keep family relationships functional. Carol mentioned that my parents had started talking about other incidents from our childhood with new awareness, questioning whether certain situations had been handled fairly. This late developing consciousness was encouraging but insufficient to repair decades of damage or convince me to return to toxic dynamics. The wedding was still months away, but the foundation of their perfect family narrative had already crumbled. My absence had forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about how our family had operated, creating exactly the kind of honest reckoning that had been needed for years, but never allowed to happen. 2 weeks before the wedding, my parents showed up at my apartment building. The doorman called to announce their arrival, and I instructed him to tell them I wasn't available. They waited in the lobby for over an hour, hoping I'd change my mind and agree to see them. When waiting didn't work, they tried a different approach. My mother began sending lengthy text messages filled with guilt trips and manipulation. She claimed I was breaking her heart, destroying the family, and being cruel to Madison during the most important time of her life. The messages revealed their complete inability to understand the situation. They focused entirely on how my absence affected them and Madison, never acknowledging the years of harm they'd caused me. Their concern was about appearances and family image, not about repairing our relationship. My father's texts were more aggressive, demanding that I stop this nonsense and warning that my behavior was unacceptable. His attempts at intimidation were particularly absurd since I'd been financially independent for years and didn't depend on them for anything. The wedding day arrived in June of last year, and I spent it hiking with Jake, completely disconnected from the drama unfolding at the vineyard. We turned off our phones and enjoyed a peaceful day in nature, celebrating my freedom from toxic family dynamics, rather than mourning my absence from Madison's perfect day. According to my Aunt Carol, who attended the wedding, the day was everything Madison had dreamed of, except for the conspicuous absence of one family member. Multiple guests asked about my whereabouts, forcing my parents to create explanations for why their other daughter wasn't present. My mother apparently told people I was sick, while my father claimed I had work obligations that prevented my attendance. Madison told her friends I was jealous of her success and couldn't handle seeing her happiness. Each explanation revealed their inability to take responsibility for the situation they'd created. The aftermath of the wedding brought a new wave of contact attempts. My parents apparently realized that having guests ask about my absence was embarrassing and reflected poorly on them. Their concern wasn't about losing me as a daughter, but about managing their public image. My mother's post-wedding messages took on a different tone, mixing anger with desperation. She accused me of humiliating the family and demanded that I explain my behavior to relatives who had noticed my absence. Her focus remained on how my choices affected them, rather than examining why I'd made those choices. Summer passed peacefully without family drama. I received a promotion at work, started planning a vacation with Jake, and began seeing a therapist to process years of emotional neglect. For the first time in my adult life, my self-worth wasn't tied to gaining approval from people who would never give it. The silence from my family stretched through the summer and into early fall. I assumed they'd moved on with their lives, focusing on Madison's new marriage and continuing to pretend I'd never existed. The quiet was exactly what I'd hoped for when I made the decision to go no contact. Everything changed this past October when Madison's marriage began falling apart. According to my Aunt Carol, Dererick had been having an affair with a coworker, and Madison discovered the infidelity just 4 months after their dream wedding. The perfect life my parents had celebrated was crumbling in spectacular fashion. Suddenly, my phone started ringing again. My mother left voicemails begging me to come home and support Madison through her difficult time. She claimed families should stick together during crisis and accused me of being heartless for staying away when my sister needed me most. The hypocrisy was stunning. After years of being excluded from important family moments and conversations, they expected me to return immediately when Madison faced her first real challenge. They wanted me to provide emotional support for the sister who had called me jealous and dramatic just months earlier. My father's messages were more direct, demanding that I stop punishing the family and return to help Madison through her divorce. He couldn't understand why I wouldn't rush home to support someone who had never supported me. The concept of consequences for their actions was completely foreign to him. Madison's messages were the most revealing. She called, sobbing, not to apologize for years of accepting preferential treatment, but to demand that I come home and help her through the crisis. She expected immediate forgiveness and support without acknowledging any wrongdoing on her part or our parents' part. Her voicemails painted her as the victim of both Derek's betrayal and my abandonment. She couldn't comprehend that my absence was a natural consequence of years of mistreatment rather than a cruel punishment designed to hurt her during a vulnerable time. I maintained my silence through Madison's divorce proceedings, which apparently dragged on for months and dominated every family interaction. My parents spent thousands of dollars on legal fees, provided emotional support around the clock, and rearranged their lives to accommodate her needs during the crisis. The contrast with how they'd handled my challenges over the years was stark. When I'd gone through a difficult breakup in college, I received a 5-minute phone call and advice to focus on my studies. When I'd struggled with job hunting after graduation, they'd suggested I lower my expectations and accept any available position. But Madison's crisis mobilized the entire family. My parents took time off work to attend court hearings, hired the best divorce attorney they could afford, and provided a shoulder to cry on whenever she needed emotional support. The level of care and attention she received during her lowest point exceeded anything I'd ever experienced during my highest achievements. This past winter brought a new development that apparently sent my parents into complete panic mode. Madison decided to move back home during her divorce, returning to her childhood bedroom like she'd never left. But living with our parents as a divorced 24-year-old apparently wasn't the comfort she'd expected. According to my Aunt Carol, Madison was struggling with depression and anxiety following the collapse of her marriage. She'd lost her identity as Derek's wife and was having difficulty adjusting to single life. My parents were overwhelmed by her constant need for emotional support and practical assistance. For the first time in their lives, my parents were experiencing what it felt like to have a child who needed more than they could easily give. Madison's problems couldn't be solved with money or praise, and her emotional needs exceeded their capacity to provide comfort and solutions. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd spent decades giving Madison everything she wanted while ignoring my emotional needs, and now they were discovering how exhausting it could be to actually parent a struggling adult child. The golden child required more maintenance than they'd bargained for. My mother's messages from this period were desperate in a way I'd never heard before. She begged me to come home and help with Madison, claiming the family was falling apart without me. She suddenly seemed to realize that having 2 daughters might have been beneficial when one needed extensive support. Her pleas revealed a truth they'd never acknowledged. I had always been the stable, self-sufficient daughter who required minimal attention and resources. While they'd been pouring all their energy into Madison, I'd been quietly building a successful life without their help or approval. This past spring brought the most shocking development of all. My mother showed up at my office building, having tracked down my workplace information from my LinkedIn profile and professional network. She waited in the lobby until my workday ended, ambushing me as I headed to my car. Seeing her after more than a year of no contact was jarring. She looked older, more tired, and genuinely distressed in a way I'd never witnessed. The confident woman who'd dismissed my feelings for decades appeared vulnerable and uncertain. She begged me to talk with her, claiming she'd driven 6 hours from Ohio just for the chance to see me. Her desperation was palpable as she pleaded for 5 minutes of my time to explain how much the family needed me. The woman, who'd never seemed to notice my absence, was suddenly claiming my presence was essential. I agreed to talk in a nearby coffee shop, curious about what could have driven her to such extreme measures. For the first time in my life, my mother was pursuing me rather than dismissing my concerns or redirecting attention to Madison. The conversation was unlike anything we'd ever had. My mother admitted that losing me had been devastating for the family, though she struggled to articulate exactly why. She claimed they'd all been lost without me, but couldn't explain what specific role I'd played in their lives. Her attempts at explanation revealed the depth of their denial about our family dynamics. She insisted they'd always love me equally, while simultaneously asking me to return home to help with Madison's problems. The contradiction between claiming equal treatment and needing me specifically to manage her sister's crisis was lost on her. When I pointed out the years of favoritism and differential treatment, my mother became defensive and claimed I was misremembering or being overly sensitive. She acknowledged that Madison had received a little more attention, but insisted it was because she needed more help and guidance. The conversation confirmed everything I'd suspected about their complete lack of self-awareness. They genuinely believed their treatment had been fair and couldn't understand why I'd interpreted their actions as harmful. Their inability to acknowledge the reality of my childhood experience made reconciliation impossible. I explained to my mother that her visit to my workplace was inappropriate and that showing up unannounced wouldn't change my decision. I reiterated my boundary about no contact and asked her to respect my choice to build a life without them. Her response was telling. Instead of apologizing for crossing boundaries or acknowledging my right to make decisions about our relationship, she became angry and accused me of being stubborn and unforgiving. The conversation ended with her storming out of the coffee shop, frustrated that her ambush hadn't produced the desired results. This past summer brought news through my Aunt Carol that Madison was finally moving out of my parents' house and attempting to rebuild her independent life. Apparently, living with our parents as an adult had been more challenging than she'd anticipated, and she was eager to reclaim her autonomy. My parents were reportedly relieved to have their house back, but also anxious about Madison's ability to manage on her own post-divorce. They'd grown accustomed to providing daily emotional support and were worried about her mental health without their constant presence. The situation perfectly illustrated the difference between how they treated us. I'd been expected to be independent from a young age, managing my own problems and emotions without parental intervention. But Madison, even in her 30s, was considered fragile and in need of constant protection and support. Fall brought a final attempt at contact from my father, who called and left a voicemail claiming he finally understood why I'd left the family. His message suggested he'd been reflecting on our relationship and recognized some mistakes in how they treated me. His voicemail was more thoughtful than anything I'd ever received from him, acknowledging that they'd given Madison more attention and resources while expecting me to be self-sufficient. He admitted that their approach had been unfair and expressed regret about losing me as a daughter. However, his apology came with conditions. He asked me to forgive their mistakes and return to the family, claiming they'd learned from their errors and would treat me better in the future. The apology felt more like a negotiation tactic than genuine remorse. I didn't respond to his message, recognizing that their sudden interest in fairness coincided suspiciously with Madison's move toward independence. They seemed to realize they needed a backup daughter now that their primary child was rebuilding her own life and requiring less of their attention. The timing of their change of heart confirmed my decision to maintain no contact. Their desire for reconciliation wasn't motivated by genuine love or regret, but by practical concerns about family dynamics and their own needs for connection and purpose. Winter marked 2 years since I'd first gone no contact, and I'd never been happier or more at peace with my decision. Jake and I had gotten engaged. I'd received another promotion at work, and I'd built a chosen family of friends who valued and supported me consistently. The contrast between my life without my biological family and my previous existence was stark. I no longer spent energy seeking approval from people who would never give it, competing for attention that would never come my way, or feeling inadequate compared to someone who would always be the favorite. My therapy sessions helped me understand that their treatment had been a reflection of their limitations rather than my worth. I learned to separate my self-value from their approval and to recognize that healthy families don't operate with golden children and scapegoats. The final piece of information I received about my family came through my Aunt Carol, who reported that my parents had apparently been asking extended family members about my current situation and whereabouts. Their inability to simply respect my boundaries and move on confirmed the wisdom of my decision. According to my aunt, they had been asking relatives for any information about my life, but they hadn't attempted to contact me directly after the workplace ambush. Perhaps they'd finally learned that confronting me would be counterproductive. Or perhaps they were waiting for another crisis that might require my assistance. Their continued attempts to gather information about me, rather than respecting my clearly stated boundaries, revealed their fundamental inability to understand consent and personal autonomy. Even after losing me as a daughter, they couldn't accept that I had the right to determine the terms of our relationship. Jake and I are planning our wedding now, creating a celebration that will be filled with people who genuinely love and support both of us. My parents won't be invited, not out of spite, but because they forfeited their right to participate in my important moments through years of indifference and neglect. The wedding planning has been joyful and stress-free, unlike the elaborate production my parents orchestrated for Madison's failed marriage. We're focusing on celebrating our love rather than impressing people or maintaining appearances, creating exactly the kind of authentic celebration I'd always dreamed of having. Sometimes I wonder if my parents ever truly understood what they lost when I walked away. They spent so many years focused on Madison's needs and achievements that they never bothered to discover who I was or what I might contribute to their lives. Their frantic attempts to bring me back after Madison's crisis suggest they finally recognized that having two daughters might have been beneficial. But their realization came too late and for the wrong reasons, motivated by practical needs rather than genuine appreciation for my worth as a person. I've built a life filled with people who see my value, celebrate my achievements, and support me through challenges. The family I've chosen treats me with the respect and love that my biological family never provided, proving that blood relationships don't guarantee healthy dynamics. Looking back, I recognize that leaving was the best decision I ever made for my mental health and overall well-being. The years I spent trying to earn their love were wasted energy that I now invest in relationships that reciprocate my care and attention. My parents created the situation that led to losing me through decades of differential treatment and emotional neglect. Their shock and desperation when I finally left revealed how little they'd understood about the impact of their actions on my psychological development and self-worth. The golden child they'd invested everything in couldn't provide the stability and support they'd taken for granted from me. Madison's needs during her crisis exceeded their capacity to help, leaving them overwhelmed and desperate for the daughter they'd always ignored. But Madison, even in her mid-20s, still required more emotional and financial support than they'd anticipated when she was the perfect golden child. Their meltdown when I walked away was unbelievable, because they'd never imagined I might have limits to my tolerance for mistreatment. They expected me to remain available indefinitely, accepting whatever scraps of attention they offered while watching them lavish love on my sister. But I finally learned that I deserved better than being an afterthought in my own family. Walking away was the most difficult and most necessary thing I ever did, and I've never regretted choosing my own well-being over their comfort and convenience. The family that crowned my sister as royalty, while treating me like nothing, discovered too late that the daughter they dismissed was the one who might have stood by them through anything. Their loss became my freedom.